Welcome to the MF, that is the masculine feminine quadrant, where we'll be breaking down distinctions and exploring the four corners of the two dual forces of masculine and feminine creation. Join us for some deeply reflective and penetrating conversation and an exchange of energies to open your body, your mind, and your being. Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of that MF Quadrant. Here with Max, the wonderful Max, and me, Shakalish. And today we've got another beautiful episode for you. Today we are talking about the wisdom faculty, or what we have called, described as the wisdom faculty. It became apparent to us in one of our previous episodes. It was episode 4, when Max asked me a question about how I had decided not to respond with my emotions. And I said I use reason, and the expression on his face was such shock that we knew that there was another episode in this. And the question that we're asking is it possible for women to have access to reason? No, that's not the question we're asking. But we're asking. Well, some philosophers would say so. We've got a few quotes from some philosophers as well, and just asking the question: how do we all access our wisdom faculty? Is it through intuition? Is it through reason? Are they the same? Are they different? Is there a different texture about them? Is it different for men and women, or different for the masculine and the feminine? Do we access this higher faculty of wisdom slightly differently? And if we do, how? And is there a compelling story around that? And I guess what we really want to explore as well in this episode is around how we come to make decisions, how we make choices in our life, how we're leading and guiding our lives, and where does that come from, and how we can better get in touch with that. So before we start, we just want to say again, thank you to all of you who are supporting the channel and liking and subscribing. We'd ask that you please, if you like what we're putting down, is to like, share, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your people, and keep opening up this conversation, because that's really our intention around this podcast, around these conversations, is to just keep extending and opening. And also, we really want to open out our show also to people who have got questions, dilemmas, things that you want to bring into the space, any additional questions you'd like to see us answer and discuss and unpack. So please do share, please do engage, and we just ask that you continue to do that. So thank you again for your support, and without further
thank
you. We'll begin. So should we start with first of all our two quotes?
I mean, I feel like the two quotes are definitely something that sets the tone for it.
So we set the tone. So first we have a quote from Immanuel Kant, and the quote is: "All our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to the understanding, and ends with reason. There is nothing higher than reason." And
this quote was injected by me.
So and so I came to the show notes and found this quote that had been injected by Max, and I was like, well, there's another philosopher takes a slightly different stance, and this was David Hume, and he said, "Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions." It's part of a longer quote and part of a book called the Treatise on Human Nature. Anyway, and so a very opposite. So again, we call this the quadrant. So we really wanted to give that tension of the opposites, which is reason that something comes in objectively that guides our actions, or is reason something that we use to ultimately drive us to get what we want, and is directed ultimately by our wants and desires? And so we'll unpack that a little bit, and much more. So is there anything you want to just jump in with at this time, Max? I can see it all percolating.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where the juiciness kind of comes in, because it kind of plays on these things of what is higher and what is a little bit more dense, kind of like, what we spoke about with the arcana and the cognitive mind, and then coming into our subjective physical, and when I think of wisdom, I think of that as the highest. It's not in information, it's not knowledge. Yeah, it's just something very pure and very, I would say, yeah, like universal in that way. So just kind of looking at that sense, and for me, reason as a tool is kind of like this portal into wisdom. I believe that we have multiple higher faculties, and I go into that, with my course, fine-tuned faculties, and these are things, these are these higher senses and these higher tools that we use. So when I came into the show notes and saw that it was a slave, I was just like, oh, okay. And a slave to passion at that, and I feel like as humans, we, yes, we do have passions and we have desires and we have these different things. But I also feel like those are very finite. So it was just interesting to see these two completely polar opposite quotes and how they came in by us, and also with the questions that we had already there, which are um, very, let's say, intimate. um, yeah, it was just interesting. So I had already answered these questions, and I just pulled the quote out of there. Shaka introduced her quote because she wanted to create that tension and just felt that it needed to be there. So yeah, I'm excited for this episode, and I think we'll bring in and stretch a deeper perspective, and yeah, just kind of continue this vibration of the wholeness that's embodied, because this is some wholeness. So yeah.
Shall we, like, shall we start by unpacking those quotes just a tiny little bit for our audience? I guess
Sure.
because I guess we were kind of talking about this just before we started recording, and that I guess that they're definitely polar opposites. This kind of sense that there is this knowledge that comes from above that filters down into us, and that's how we're getting that's how we're connecting to this ultimately what's higher knowledge. And then you've got that's a kind of Kant view, right? Is that like we're trying to, or our practice is around refining ourselves so that we can access that pure higher knowledge. Whereas I guess Hume had and I guess why I included it was because he thought that basically humans could delude themselves into thinking that, like, think about the religious, teacher who genuinely feels that they are the voice of God, and do all sorts of, whatever it is, but basically can ultimately say, no, that's high knowledge that's coming in. Like, how many people do we know that can fool themselves into thinking that, oh yeah, no, it's higher knowledge that's coming in that I'm doing, like, either for God or for. And so I guess Hume kind of was very suspicious of that, and noticed that obviously around this time with all the philosophical conversations and kind of exchanges that were going on at that time, his view was that actually that humans can delude themselves, and that actually what we use reason for is to get what we want. And he didn't just say passions as in emotions. He calls them passions, and that was just the language of the time, but he's essentially talking about our unique drivers, our things that make us move towards certain things, and be using our reason for that end. And that it I don't think it's not that he didn't necessarily I mean, it's been a long time since I read Hume. I don't want to like, I'm not trying to argue Hume's position here, but I think it's just not necessarily that it was impossible to have access to objective knowledge, but that's not what motivates human beings. That we might like to think is objective knowledge that motivates us, but ultimately, actually, it's our own desires. I think there's something compelling in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel I hear that. And I think when it comes down to wisdom and those higher knowledges, what I've come to understand is that there's a process within it all. And to just say that, to be motivated, there is this reason, and like that's the connection. It's just two things. I think with dealing with wisdom, there is a little bit more in between that process. And just for us as complex human beings, like obviously, like we're always trying to give some coherence between our mind, our body, our being, create harmony within us. And it's like, why? you know and it's because we know that there is this center balance, there is this higher, whether you call it consciousness, whether you call it God, love, wisdom, whatever you want to put the finger on. We're always trying to align ourselves with something, but to align yourself, there's a process, because we have these natural passions and these natural delusions, and there is the Maya, there is the illusion, there is the lies, there's the deceit, the self, the shadow, all these different things. So for me, I listened to these and like received these quotes and was like, okay, for me, where is the truth? Because I utilize that as my compass and like an orientation. And where it really kind of resonated with me was, okay, now as I am going through this and I'm looking, not necessarily seeking, but looking to receive this objectivity, and one of the other higher faculties being intuition is like, when I tap into that, I know that it's my spirit talking to me because it has a specific voice, it has a specific frequency of a specific tone. So like understanding that texture, I came to feel like, okay, that's what I'm passionate about. That's where I can move. I can move in my intuition. But then I also came to an understanding that there is an illusion. There is that self. There is the desire, these things that kind of pull me in this direction. So I can understand that that's a certain type of frequency, a texture. So you have these different sensations. So for me, it was like this higher faculty, and to fine tune it is, there is that step of understanding which one is which. And then when I come down here into this person, yes, I can be fueled to do something, through my intuition. But then there's also times where I'm not compelled to do it. I don't have a passion to be wise, or when something comes in, it's just, that's wisdom. So to say that wisdom is a slave of that passion, and that there is that, that reason is that slave to the passion, that for me is like, is too confined. It's just saying that it's these two things and that's the relationship. I think that there's a process when you come to expand into those higher faculties, and I think understanding is that step, because for understanding, there's almost like a humility that's under wisdom, to have like this separation, from that wisdom, to know that there's a higher wisdom than me, and I'm just receiving that.
And so I guess I mean, like, just before we dive into the question, I've got another question I kind of want to ask you, because I guess what I'm hearing from you is that there's a feel, you kind of, you're feeling around for this, the difference in which knowledge, or where that knowledge is coming from, and how you're using that. And so I guess that makes me innately want to ask you, do you feel that there is a difference between reason and intuition? And if there is, for you, what does that look like? What does that feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe that there are ultimately like 6 higher faculties that I tend to focus on, and that's what like I said, I built the course around that, and these are just higher faculties of senses that I started to create, because as humans, we're sensation based. You know, if I am going to connect to this body and I am going to utilize it, let me utilize the tools that I have. And like, how do I bring in information? And if I know that consciousness is a higher, you know, intellect, and there's information that we have in our physical, and then there's intellect, like actual intelligence that's not confined by just information, the formation of the internal. It's like, what can I utilize? So it was like, okay, let me go inside and start to feel into these senses. What comes naturally? What am I intuiting? You know, this thing that's internal, that I have a compass that goes out. And then also this reason that comes in through the mental, you know, because reason for me is like how, like, the justification that we have, like real sound knowledge that comes into us, that we say, okay, this is the reason, this is the balance, you know, this is the yes and no, this is the good and bad, you know, it's like the moral compass, you know. But we can also have an intuition that comes from a wholeness to say, you know, there's an acceptance, there's these more, let's say, tender and like sensitive things that are around it. And when something comes in intuitively, it's natural. There's no balancing. I don't need to balance it. It just comes in and it is what it is. You know, for reason, I feel like it is a higher faculty of the mind. And I feel like intuition is more a higher faculty of the heart. Yeah. And I think that's just also, you know, a part of just me as the masculine side, you know, to this was, for example, to tap into that somatic and, you know, into the sensations, because really, you know, you can feel into your body. And, you know, once you get to a point with the physicality, you know, and these different layers of the physical plane, and you go into the subtle plane, you go into the causal plane, it's like you can still utilize that tool of sensing, but you just have different senses. So I feel like with reason, it is more on that subtle level of the mentality and, you know, of the intellect and of your life force. So intuition, I feel like, is a little bit higher. It goes into that causal plane because it's more, yeah, sensitive, you know, and it's very like, I would say you asked like what does that feel like? And I feel like if the physical body, right, is my nakedness, right? I feel like the subtle plane is like my underwear, you know, like my undershirt, my boxers, my socks. And then like that causal plane is like my shoes and my pants, you know, it's the stuff that's over it. So like, does your physical body actually feel your pants? You know, like, do you feel that? You know, even as you're sitting there now, do you feel your necklace on you? Do you feel your earrings? You know, these things that are on your person, but we kind of like tune out because we're so internalized, like in here, you know? And I think that's where that expansion kind of comes from, our central nervous system to outside, you know?
I love that. So guys, you gotta go to Max's website and check out his course on the higher faculties.
Yes, yes. If you're
So
interested, I will drop the link, because it's all about practicing that and making it practical and bring it, like grounding it. I know that sometimes we can get very esoteric, but these are also things that you can, it's really a bridge. Like every course that I create is a bridge to, from that space all the way into the physical, and how to bring it there. So after you hit that subscribe button, hit that comment button and ask me to shoot you the link. I got you.
yes, yes, yes. And it reminds me, so like when you were talking, it reminds me, now that you're saying this, it reminds me of the koshas in yoga, which is like the subtle bodies. And like we start with the physical body, then the pranic body, then the mental body, and then the wisdom body. And then we like come to the core, which is the bliss, the oneness, and the wisdom is just before that. And I guess, yeah, my understanding of wisdom is that it's unique knowledge that can be found. So for example, I guess, so coming back to Kant, like he kind of had his kind of philosophical, I guess, out like big, he's like known for, I can't remember the name, I can't remember the actual like what it was called, but it was like basically the golden rule. Essentially is like, you know, do unto others as you would have done unto you, basically, because in the end that's essentially the only moral like moral thing you can do, essentially. Sorry if I've I can hear all these like philosophers going, no, she's murdered the anyway, but that's basically, it boils down to that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and then, so I guess like, you know, and if you want to like say, so for example, if you look at like the 10 commandments, for example, like don't kill, don't lie, don't do this or do that or do this. It's very simple. It's like very like rigid moral, like, you know, categories. And that for me, wisdom says, oh, we can bend that slightly. There might be times when actually it is actually a good thing to lie. So for example, when you come into like moral philosophy and you're talking about like, oh, there's an axe man at the door and there's a child inside the, you know, do you tell him that the child is in the other room? Like, well, obviously in that situation, the right thing to do is to lie. And that is us utilizing like unique knowledge that is
Mm-hmm.
applied to a unique situation in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
That, all right, we could maybe say, oh, you shouldn't do this or you should do that, this is good or this is not good. Actually in that situation that's a good thing, in that situation it might not be a good thing. And for me that's kind of what wisdom is. It's being able to use the right knowledge in the right situations for the right things, you know, like drawing on the right tools,
Mm-hmm.
and moving in the world in that way, being able to yeah, be dynamic as one needs to be, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean which doesn't mean you know, just instrumentalizing. I don't mean just instrumentalizing for one, you know, for one's wants.
Yeah.
I think there's something, yeah, about certain knowledge becoming important in certain situations and being able
Yeah.
to difference. And I just want to say quickly, just to add actually to your point about the felt feeling, it's so interesting because when I was reflecting on this question about what would I feel the difference is between intuition and reason, it's really interesting that I felt the same thing. Intuition feels embodied. It feels like something that's in my body. Whereas reason, I've definitely had a concept of reason being something that was like something in above my mind or above my head.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, something that was like clean in the mental sphere. And then intuition was something that was a felt bodily sense.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because as you were saying that, like that wisdom, it comes down to like the tool, and I feel like what you're speaking about is how it comes into us,
Mm.
and then we start to weigh it. And for me, that's like a discernment,
Mm.
which is similar to the first question that we have, is like where it brings in judgment, and this is also the thing too, is like why we came up with this question of where does the trust in your judgment arise from, and I think that when you have this wisdom, right, and I've just come to understand this, it's this wisdom that's there, and if I'm not attaching to it but I know I have access to it, then once it enters me, then I can practice discernment. um
Mm.
but also I tie discernment to reason in a way, because when it comes in, it's very objective, and now I have to weigh within my heart and my own individuation to discern, and then the more I do this, then the more I'm able to, build that trust within myself, so this is kind of like what we were talking about with the self and the shadow and the animon, the animus, and all these different things of there's this consistent, teeter totter, and this is what the whole quadrant is about, is like the teeter totter, but discernment I see is as a tool. And this again ties in, to the course as well. And this is something I truly have come to learn, and that is something I actively practice. So you'll hear me like refer to the course like a lot, because this is a practice that I ultimately do, and I've done in the past to get me to this point, to understand that practicing keen discernment is kind of like the stone that you utilize to sharpen, that reason, and the more sharp and the more precise your reason is, then the more you can trust in it, you know. And for me, I know that, just as a man, and also just as being on this planet for 34 years, like we develop so many layers on top of us. So it's like, how do we trust? You know, how do we trust which this voice is and what this other voice is, you know? And especially for some of us that if you've experienced like anxiety or, you know, depression or loneliness, or, you know, you're just really confused, or you have trouble like getting to sleep, all these different things that come into the physical body, your senses are completely like overflown, you know? And this question brought up a lot in a sense of like, what is really trust? So you have to build that relationship. It's building a relationship with a tool that you have, you know, and it's also a faculty in a sense that you have, because we're always told that we have five senses, you know, and then it just confines you to those five senses. So now you're built into that finite of five, you know, and it's like, well, what if we want to expand, you know? If I come to this understanding that I have access to this light and access to this higher wisdom, and I know that yes, I am that, I am the light and all that stuff, but I know that it's also a place that I just want to access because I'm also human and this is the human experience that I'm having. Then what is that tool? What is that bridge? What is that vessel that I can continuously kind of like plug into, you know? And for me, it's like what you were saying is, you know, with the axe man, right? It's like if he comes to the door, do I discern and say, like, okay, let me stay true to myself. And if this guy asks me a question, yes, there is a child in there. Now, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. That level of trust, like my level of trust in my capability as a man, like, yeah, I'm going to tell you he's there. Because then what's up? What you going to do? You know? Like that's the shadow pulling up, you know. The shadow's like, yeah, you know that we can handle this. But if he's like 6'9", 400 pounds, I'm gonna be like, child, what do you mean, child? There are no children here. I have an inner child, but there's nobody else here, you know. So practicing that discernment, you know, is like then we can kind of weigh it out and we have that free will to kind of just, you know, do as we choose. But I think it also comes up too with like in a relational space when you're with your partner, you know, it's like, how true can I be? You know, because ultimately now that trust that comes in that, you know, that has arisen, like maybe, yeah, I do trust in my discernment that my partner is, or maybe I do trust in my discernment that I can be true, you know, or that I would like to tell the truth. But also, maybe I don't have enough trust in that person that they're able to receive this, you know? So I think with that discernment is like how we can practice our level of awareness. And like even in the course, like I pair reason and memory, which is another higher faculty. You know, it's like what do I remember about this person, like how they like to be held, how they like to receive information. So, you know, if my lady's like, yeah, does this just make me look fat? Like that's the part. Is like, do I tell the truth and like stick to my, you know, that higher wisdom of, or can I find that fine-tuned way of establishing like the trust in our communication where I'm like, well, baby, listen, it don't make you look fat. Like, you know. But am I seeing your voluptuousness? Absolutely. You know?
They
But
don't call it
I
fat
feel
anymore.
like
Curvilicious.
right. So
That's
I
desirable.
think that's that part where we can kind of start to understand like where that trust in these higher faculties is, because most people don't have a relationship with these higher faculties, you know, like you were explaining about the philosophers back in these days. And you know, like women couldn't even philosophize back then, black people couldn't even philosophize back then. So you have this kind of like general access, like, you know, white men only access because we have access to the intelligence and the wisdom and stuff like that. But it's like now we're a lot more people are gaining more access because we're breaking out of that those finite five senses, you know. So I think building the trust with these higher faculties can help to we can help to understand what that actual relationship is, and then really look at our judgment and say, okay, I'm able to discern this, I'm able to judge, you know, what voice this is, which one is this, and really get a fine-tuned frequency for whichever one it is.
Yeah.
But do
Absolutely.
you feel like you've come through to that trust sometimes? Because the way that you said the other day in that other episode was that you utilized reason in that way. And then when I saw this one, like this quote, and you pulled up with, it's a slave to the passions, I was like, oh, what is happening here? What is happening here? Is a trigger being created?
It's the chaotic feminine just trying to come through and like just stir it up a little bit.
I am with it. I'm on for this ride. So I would love to hear where the trust in this passion comes by to just enslave your higher faculty of reason.
Well, I guess first of all, I would say I completely agree with you. That trust in your judgment is something that gets built over time. That's something you got to execute, and then you get to know what your signal is for those moments, those junctures where you have to use your judgment, that discernment, to make well, you know, and that's ultimately what wisdom is, right? It's like we're off the beaten path now, you know, and like, you know, Instagram and pop psychology might not, you know, telling you, you know, hey, if you see this red flag, that means that don't do this, don't do that, or like this means that, or, you know, in a relationship it's supposed to be all of this kind of pop psychology that fits a particular, you know, situation, but your situation might not look like that. It might not exactly look like that. So you have got to be able to be in a position where you are making your own decisions for yourself and be discerning in your own life. And that can be really, really hard because you have to really trust yourself and know, okay, is that this situation or is that this? Does this situation need this from me or that? And that is a muscle that definitely, I completely agree with you, that has to get built over time. I think that's something you constantly use. I mean, in the book Women Who Run with Wolves, she talks about that as well, is that's something that you keep using in order for you to just it grows like a muscle. It's just literally that you use.
And guys, if you haven't read that book, I'm not gonna say I'm a step ahead of you, but read it. Read it. And I feel like a lot of guys should be reading more literature, bringing more things into their life that are more quote unquote feminized to understand those you know other sides to you and to kind of get a wider spectrum on this quadrant. But not to cut you off, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Absolutely. So interject away. I like, no, and I say it to women as well. I think it's like it's one of the holy grails. Like it is a really fantastic book.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
She's a like it's quite difficult. It's quite dense. Like there's some really dense stuff in there, but you know it's worth it. Like it's fantastic. A lot of wisdom in there, a lot of heart, and yeah. So where do I guess, you know, this is what I think the reason why I put this quote, this Hume quote in, is because I do really believe that, you know, I mean, maybe the quotes for me are talking about slightly different things, right? Because the kind of objective knowledge that we get that comes from above, like, so for example, the situation in, I think it was that episode where I was talking about the email that caused this massive like emotional reaction in me, and then I was like, right, what's the decision that I do? Like, where does that decision of what to do about that come from? And I said it was reason. And I think maybe that's where I understand the distinction, is that in that situation it wasn't my passions that was leading, but in many ways, in some ways maybe it was, because my passion is my desired outcome. Like ultimately there was a desired outcome in that, which was, I want to keep my peace. I don't want to lose my shit, and I don't want to really waste my energy on anything that's really negative. So those were like kind of my desires out of this. Like, you know, I mean, this thing had been brought to me. I didn't go out searching for it, it came to me. And then I was like, okay, those are so then my reason is used to get that desired outcome. So in that sense, the Humean kind of idea that my reason was used to basically be a slave of my passions, in that sense, I think that could be argued, in the sense that there was a desired outcome that I wanted, and I was using my reason to get that desired outcome. Or
but I feel like sticking to that question,
Mm-hmm.
of trusting in your judgment, where it arose from, because that situation didn't come to you. You chose, and you used, I don't know if you use your judgment or whatever, but you chose to open the email.
Yes, I did. Well, I mean, you wouldn't even have opened it. Okay, well, that's a okay. That's
Because
enough.
it's, for me, the discernment comes before that. If I cut off all of these ties from this person, right, and I created these boundaries, and then this one little thing comes in, I'm discerning, oh, I don't have to answer this. I created these boundaries to not give that thing access to me. So what I think about it in resources, like my time, my energy, and my attention. So now if this wants my attention, that's a doorway in. Now you're going to get my time. Now you're going to get my energy. No, 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 no. We're not even going to do the attention. It's not even ignoring, acknowledge. Oh, you sent me an email. Great. On with my day, because I want my peace. I want my joy. So that passion of keeping that state is
Yes.
for me. So what this question was where does that trust in that judgment, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm.
or was that judgment even there?
I mean, good point. Good point. I mean, to be fair, I mean, well, because there's always nuance. There's always nuance, right? So, I mean,
You sip my tea.
okay. So I did purposely had left the back door open for the email, and I opened the email because I thought maybe there would be an apology in there, and it turned out there wasn't. So I was like, oh, okay,
No.
I'm leaving the back door
Yeah.
open for an apology, and it turned out it
Oh,
wasn't.
that
But
feels
anyway,
so good.
that was that was
So
the
one would say that that is your true passion and your true deeper desire.
was it an apology?
You
Was it?
had wanted the apology.
Well, maybe it still was about peace, actually. Maybe it was still about making peace and
Hmm.
having like, but yeah, it's anyway, that's by the by. To be honest, this question wasn't even about this. I was using that as an example, but like when I think about trusting my judgment, and I do, I think ultimately for me, I felt like I did the right thing. I felt like there was I left space for there to be
Uh-huh.
um some humility and reconciliation had that mentality been
Right.
there. I left that door open, and as it turned out, it was confirmed to me that that mentality wasn't present, and that person was not capable of that, and that was okay. And then that was the final
Mhm.
that's the final, but yeah, like I think that was for me, that felt like the right thing to do. So although I was like, yeah, shutting the
So
door,
you trusted in that.
yeah, I felt that was the right thing to
Okay.
do. And still now, even with that in mind.
Hmm.
um yeah.
And
um
where does that level of trust, whether it causes this pulling away from peace and then you have to find that back, where does that really arise from? Like within you?
I mean, it doesn't, all right, it kind of threw me for a little bit, but in the end it doesn't throw me at all, because ultimately what it is that I know I am living a life that's in alignment with my heart, and I know that I don't treat people like that. I know that I show up in certain type of way in my relationships. And I would never do that. I would never send. And so I just feel like I just wouldn't do that to somebody. And so for me, that's just my sense of like, okay, well, I'm good with that. And actually what I can take from that is that that is not a person that's living in peace and in harmony with themselves. Because had that door been open to me, I know I wouldn't go and like try and shoot up the plate. Like I just haven't got the energy for that. Who's got time for that? So anyway, that side, I don't really want to talk about that situation because but it's a good example, I guess, because it is like, we there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. Yeah, that is subjective. That is fully subjective to me. Of like kind of feeling like, was that the right thing to do? Ultimately, I feel like it was. Because it means that I can really close that door and really not feel there really is nothing, no other questions, that there was no other questions that was left in my mind. And I think that was the right thing to do.
Now,
Yeah.
was that wisdom, and where did you exercise that judgment within that?
Hmm.
Because ultimately there has to be some trust, whether if that experience comes up again or not, right?
Well, if that experience comes up again, it's going to be a different experience because it's not going to be with that
No,
person.
not exactly. But if you're a person, right, that doesn't have this relationship with that higher faculty of reason, you
Mhm.
know,
Mm.
and you haven't necessarily built that trust, and we still haven't got to like where that trust kind of
Where did it
arises from.
come?
But
I mean, for me,
when that situation, that was just a learning experience for you to practice this thing or to sharpen the tool, you know.
I mean, I guess when
So
I, sorry, go on. No, go on. You finish.
no,
Sorry.
where does I'm just that was really the question of like, where does that trust in that arise?
I would say when I ask this question, when I create this question, in my mind, actually, the thing that I was thinking of was when I chose to come and move to Costa Rica. So for me,
Mm,
all right, there'd been many, many moments, like choice points in my life. But for me, that was like something that just landed in my body. And it was a knowing. It just was like, and every time I asked the question, should I do this? Bam, that was the answer. It was like, are you sure? Yes. It was like not even, there was no question. It was like do. So like if you ask me, what does that look like? What does that feel like? It's when like I feel it as like a physical sensation of just like like it just feels like that. Like I can't explain it. Like like, and I just get the answer. Like the answer is in me. It's like it is upon me. It's with me, and
mm,
and so that was a decision that came to me. That's not like that was something that I used to move forward in my life and make a decision in my life, and that's how it comes to me. That's how I know the quality of it.
mm-hmm.
Does that get changed in relationships? Yes, I think for me it does. So I have decisions for my life that I feel land in me very, very clearly like that. And then I
So
definitely
the
feel
trust
like,
is just really in your body.
yeah, I feel so. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, I feel
mm,
so.
mm.
Uh, yeah. And then I definitely say in the relational space that gets a little bit more like I think for me that gets a little bit hard. Like I'm like because I'm an empath as well. I'm always like, is that mine? Is that you know what I mean? And I can get swayed and like and I always think, is that you know what I mean? So sometimes I feel like I'm still learning that in the relational space.
Mm,
Like how to really just drop in objectively clear. I feel that and like you know what I mean? Because I think
mm,
I'm still learning that dance. But I think for me, for decisions in my life, that feels a lot more like clear and clean. Like I'm like, I know
mm,
what I need to do for myself when I making, you know, that feels very easy for me. And it's a felt sensation in the body. Yeah.
mm. Okay. Yeah. I feel like there can be some coming back to those quotes, but we're not going to exercise that. I'm going to let you dig a little bit more. Because when you just said that when there's all this alignment and there's this trust in the physical like tool that comes in. And for me, I was like, okay, I'm trusting in this discernment, you know, um, and that higher faculty, you know, with the mind. There is those that reflection or that essence of like how you tune into the body and you use that sensation of the body and like as a feminine and me in the sense of more of the masculine, I utilize that discernment to sense, you know, around and like, okay, what is this? I know that there is nothing right, I know there is nothing wrong, but there's this sensation of the balance, you know. And I think that's the part of this this second question of like, how aware are we throughout the day to be able to drop in, you know, at our will, you know. And at will it just means like on point, you know. And to for me that like will just kind of when I allowed this question to kind of like absorb and assimilate within me, it was like, okay, will is about precision. It's like that for me is like passion. When I want to enact my will on the world, for me, it's like precise. Like I need to know exactly this is what I want. And then I enact my will to like bring it towards me, you know? So when I was like, okay, if I'm dropping in at that, you know, I need to know, you know, if I'm going to drop into this is a heart sense thing, then I use my intuition, you know, and I need to be really precise on that. Like, what is my intuition really saying? And for me, I've utilized this tool of like gravity. Like my heart speaks in gravity. If I feel this like pull or like pressure, that's how I know, you know. So this, I think the awareness is also that part of the activity of that. And for me, I like, you know, maybe it's the masculine, maybe it's the kineticness, whatever it is, but I need to have active awareness, you know, because for me, it's like focus. If I'm here, that's where I'm at. I'm in the middle. I'm focused on balance. Can I be aware of this stuff that's going on? Great. Yes, I could be aware that, you know, there's an axe man at the door and maybe I should tell him the truth. And maybe that kid needs to, maybe the kid did something wrong and maybe he does need to get axed. Or I'm very aware of like, hey, you're actually a dad and you want to be a protector and maybe you should lie to this guy and it's really not that bad. Whatever. You know, it's like, can I be aware of these things? But the activity of that can allow me to kind of step out of my mind sometimes and say, hey, maybe this is not necessarily for you to discern. Maybe this is for you to like just listen and into it and then move off that heart, move off that gravity. So I think you utilize that, that where you expressed how you chose that when going into Costa Rica, right? And the same thing was for me. You know, I move around the world from that heart space. I allow gravity to kind of pull me there. And then once I arrive there, then I go, okay, let me discern these things. So in a sense, like that's where I kind of use these practicalities. You know, for example, when I came to Colombia, it was all heart. I was like, oh, I get this pull and I'm going there out of no reason why. But once I arrive and I start to interact with, you know, some people that were with projects and a couple of my friends, things like that, it's like now I can discern because I'm still like this. I'm still focused on what I'm doing, you know, what's truly in my heart and what my truth is. So even though my heart pulled me into this new dimension, I'm settling there and not allowing all these other things that I'm aware of. I can be aware because my senses are heightened, but I'm not going, oh, okay, like it's that, oh, okay, it's that. And then I start to lose focus, you know? And maybe that is a masculine thing to, you know, be still and be focused and be certain and be all these things. But that's just a position that I've chose to exercise. Again, these higher faculties, because for me that is the access to the wisdom, you know, like once I arrive, I'm able to as a man be focused but also be open, you know, and like that is the for me the feminine, that the feminine is to be open but to also be receptive, you know. And it's this, you know, you can go into the essences of like vulnerability and blah 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 and all these things, but for me I've worked past that, you know. I'm consistently doing things that like vulnerability to me is like the ability to continuously do that. Can I keep offering information, you know, can I keep being open and giving to the world? Like that is the openness. That's how me being active as a man, I remain open. So yeah, having access to that wisdom, and I know that me continuously being open, that these other things I'm able to discern and trust in that judgment that anything that's to harm me is not going to come in. So the only thing that I'm actually receiving is this light and is this wisdom. So yeah, that ability to be able to drop into that and know like what my heart is saying, and then also know, okay, where do I practice this discernment? It's like this activity of this awareness. And yeah, some might think like, oh, that takes a lot of energy. Oh my God, like how do you focus throughout the day? How do you, you know, do this? And it's something that's practiced, you know. And it's like when you go into the gym for the first time, you're not going to know where all of the equipment is or know how your body's going to respond. But after day after day after day, and it becomes your lifestyle, then you automatically know where these things are, what weight you want to start with, all the different things. So yeah, I think you can 100% become actively aware to be able to drop in. For sure.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think I think we agree in that sense. Like I feel like what? Okay, no, I thought you were gonna add something else. Okay. Yeah, that I feel like dropping in is that capacity to separate or distance yourself from all of whatever is in your field at any given time, and just really connect to yourself, your own body. And I think like a practice that really helps with that is meditation, because the more that you practice meditation, the more that you practice being still, the more that you practice just being and I don't want to say no mind necessarily, but just practice noticing what is there when you are being still can really help you understand kind of where you are. And I think what you were talking about, like when you were talking about that, the kind of balance between being open and directing your will, I felt like, I guess I would call that presence. Like, am I able to bring presence to just exactly where I am in this moment, and just be aware of what's coming in my field and what I'm putting out in my field, and like that, and just being aware of kind of that, and just being able to step out. And for me, that's what dropping in means. I guess for me, it means like dropping into not necessarily a meditative state, but a state in which I've practiced through meditation. So a capacity to just really come into a real just state of presence, simple presence, non-judgmental presence, and just be what's in my field, what's here, what isn't. And then from there, that's, you know, like you said, that's when you can utilize your will. You can start to make discernment, make decisions. You either, you know, you decide to retreat or move forward, or whatever the next move or the next decision might be, the next choice. Maybe if there is even a choice point at all, maybe just want a bit of respite and just want to just take a moment to get into your body and just be for a moment, you know, rather than just, you know, all of the action and activity and stimulus and, you know, communication that's going on in our day-to-day lives. And so I feel like, yeah, for me, the dropping in is like something that comes with a regular, consistent meditation practice, because I think that that's just something, a state that you can then just access even when you're not necessarily meditating.
Yeah, I love that part, because it's a state is a feeling, you know, and for me it's a sense as well, you know, and yeah, it's a frequency to be on. And it's not to say that, you know, when you encounter every experience, you just drop into your meditation. It's like, what does that state feel like, you know? But it's interesting that you said into like a non-judgmental space and a non-judgmental state, but then still practice discernment. That I have trouble wrapping my head around.
Well, I think
Because when you throw in the sense of passions, and ultimately that's just like another way of saying will,
yes.
then if I'm in that state of non-judgment or non, you know, saying this is that or that's that, then how do you as an intuitive discern in that?
I guess I feel like the state of presence isn't the state within which you use the discernment. The state of presence is the state that you use to just tap into, connect to, be with that place of pure being. And then from there,
what does that feel like?
I feel like it feels like spaciousness, peace. There's a sense of spaciousness, that there's a capacity to hold all that's present. And there's nothing that needs to be other than what it is. It's just simply like, that is what it is. And that there's a container. Sometimes I call it an infinite container of compassion. Sometimes I ask my students to imagine an infinite container of compassion that can hold whatever is present for you in this given moment. Nothing is outside of this container. So therefore, there's nothing you need to worry about, nothing that needs to be hidden, there's just simply enough to hold whatever is. And then that can put you in a place of regulation, a place of connection, a place of being, a place of connecting to that higher self, to that higher faculty, to that higher state. And then from there, when you emerge out of that state, I feel like that's when the discernment comes. So for example, I mean, I guess, and I was asking this question of like, I guess I'm thinking of like in the day when you're like, you've got 1,000 emails and you're like doing 100 things and you're responding to messages and you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and you've got to go here, and you've got to go there, and you've got your job and whatever, and you've got to cook dinner and all of the things that you have to do. Is there a place where you can just step out of the doing and the busyness of your life and just be in that state of presence? I wasn't necessarily meaning like you drop in to then make a decision, but if you're using it in that capacity, then I think there's something about stepping out of the noise for a moment and just being with the presence. And then once you step back into the fray, the fray of everyday life, then you're more connected to that energy. And it is from there discernment or the decision comes from. Because again, when talking about, being reactive, or, you're not coming from a kind of like a reactive place, you're coming from a place that's hopefully more spacious, more considered, and more connected.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a lovely way to put that. And ultimately, to be esoteric, it's like that you're creating space, basically, and I think that's when we start to come to understand, just like you said, like what do I want to fill that container with, and you utilize this thing of compassion. I think that's beautiful too. For most people, when you're in your day to day and you're doing all of these different things, like we feel like because that relationship with that wisdom, or that relationship with that reason or intuition, whatever it may be, that access to that outside, and they're kind of like confined into that finite five senses. Then all your senses are being overloaded with all these different things. You're walking through the mall and you smell Cinnabons, and you look over there and you see a shirt that you really, really want, but you don't even really need. And then, all these different things is like, it's overwhelming, and it's tapping into these resources of like your attention and your energy and your money and your time and da 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 da. And it's like, where do I just step back into, like you said, that space and peace?
And I want to say slow down, because even as you were enacting that, you were like, it's true, like in our everyday life, this feels like there's so much speed, it's constant. And then how do you like slow down and observe everything happening as it's happening, and then take that in for what it is like, and then you can kind of get behind it. And like you said, you're not just like, oh, I want the buns. Oh no, I want the t-shirt. Oh no, I think I want to do this. And I, you know what I mean? Like just like your attention being pulled in all these different, how do you slow that right down? And then you can be really, really conscious and directive about, like you say, your will, your direction, yeah, and your intentions,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what that process for me is, what brought around, or what I guess made that quote resonate so much, because that process of understanding how to slow down, and that your body does need things, your mind does need things, your soul is always going to be back here, kind of doing this and looking at you like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you got mad t-shirts, why do you need another t-shirt? Like, why are you even in this mall? Like, why are you even doing it? Doesn't necessarily comprehend those human things, but when we can drop into that space, then we can start to understand, what is the reason for these things, and maybe this is just semantics, but for me, it's like, again, just to tie back into the beginning, it's the justification. What is the reason for this? And reason is just like the support, or that access. Why am I going to go look for more wisdom? Why am I going to have access to this? It's like that. What is the justification? What am I going into the meditation for? It's like, that part is the exercising of the reason for me. So when I allow something to come, or something does come, I know that I'm in a state of happiness. I'm in a state of peace. I'm in a state of joy. Like, stillness for me is like my samadhi. It's like, this is where I'm at. That's for me is happiness. That's what some people would call peace or joy. Like, all of us have an ultimate state that's at our core, that we consistently go for, and I I don't say go for as in a sense of like it's further from you, or it's not, it's separate from you. It's just that we're consistently trying to get back to it. It's like life pulls us in this way, our emails, our job, our kids, our this, our bills, and da da da. It's everything is pulling you out of that center. And really the practice, and for me, is like the utilization, what the blessing in all of these higher faculties are, is the tools that we have to kind of get back to
Mm-hmm.
this center and really find that, and for me, that was what this third question kind of formed around, was like, what does that happiness look like to me? And as we were going through this, it was like, one of the things that you said was huge, which I think is one of the most beautiful things that we didn't really like encapsulate in this, is the spaciousness. Like once we create spaciousness for ourselves, then we have the choice and the will to fill that. We get so caught up with enacting our will and having willpower to do all these things in the external world, and it all takes you away from that. And we think that, oh, I'm going out to do this and enact my will and enact this is what the passion that drives me, and then we create a means to an end, which is the reason. And for me, I always have this quote of, we don't have a reason for the things that we want, we find a reason because we want it. And it's like, then you're being driven by the passion, which is why, like, when you injected that quote, I was like, wow, I feel like it's the complete opposite. Like our reason, our passions are being driven, and then that reason is just placed there. We find something. So for me, it was like, wow, our mind is actually being utilized in that. If it's being driven by passion, then we have this passion that's in front of us, and we tell ourselves the illusion that it's happiness, and then we create a reason for our mind to make that first step and then get to that thing, so that we can ultimately get our passion. And then what? We think that we're happy, and then we keep recreating that, and we use the mind to do that. And it's like, for me, I've always taken a position of like, I love the mind. I love our intelligence. I love the spaciousness and the expansion of our mind, the true power of it. I'm talking about actual intelligence of the mind, not the mental, but these different, layers of it. So in that sense of like, what that happiness looks like is that process of coming back, allowing myself to be pulled in that way, whilst I'm still practicing discernment and doing these things, but then also to come back to that and ultimately find that happiness looks like stillness, it looks like balance, it looks like peace, and ultimately it's harmony. And I guess the reason and the wisdom is the harmony, but the reason is really this polarity of, I would say, peace and balance. For me, is really what is the culmination of this whole thing of harmony. So when we talk about wholeness embodied, if I'm embodying harmony, then this is that part that says, okay, you know if I'm embodying this harmony, what do I need to do? What do I need to actually input and discern? Okay, this is what it is. And it really comes down to peace and balance. And once I have those, then I'm able to have that happiness created.
So I love that. I love what you said about happiness, because I feel like there's a lot of people that when we think about, and I think this is a natural thing of like humans that we do, is like, when we think about happiness, we're thinking about something that we want. If I have this, I'll be happy. If I get this, I'll be happy. If I have this money, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
So it's always like outside of yourself. And if it's always outside of yourself, it's always going to be outside of yourself. You're never going to be happy, because there's never going to be a satiation, because it's always going to be predicated on something, that you're trying to draw into your life or get more of, or something that you need.
Right.
So in that sense, I completely agree. I think happiness is an inside job. Like, I think that's what I took from what you were saying, was that it's very much yeah, something that needs to be cultivated from within.
Mm-hmm.
We can be very, very discerning, again, I want to say, about what we invite back into our space, you know, what things come into our space that then support that
Mm.
happiness. And also I really love that you know, that your the words that you used around happiness was like harmony, peace, balance,
Mm-hmm.
stillness, spaciousness, you know. And these are not, you know, again, when we think of happiness, often we think of like elated, I am on top of the world, I want to celebrate, like, you know, I just won the lottery. You know,
Right.
doesn't have, you know, happiness is not necessarily that. I mean, it might be for some, you know, or it's a still sense of contentment. And I do think it's very useful for us to really think about what is happiness for us. Like, I think for me, similarly,
Yeah.
I
What
think
does it look like for you?
for me it's contentment. It's a sense of contentment. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and I think
Because I feel like you're a consistently happy person.
to be fair, I am lucky. I am, to be fair, I generally would say to people, I generally lean on being a very, yeah, like I generally am quite happy person. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's probably my default position is, yeah.
Mm.
I'm just generally happy to be here. I'm like, cool. Like
Happy to be here.
happy to be here.
Yeah, there's some place I pull up and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm out of here.
I mean, I'm not always happy. And I, you know, and definitely, and I have to caveat what I said about happiness being an inside job, is that I really do feel like there's definitely situations and external things in our environment, relationships that can chip away at our capacity to be happy as well. So although we say it's an inside job, I do think, like, I think though two things are true, right? You could have all the money in the world, the house, the car, the this, the that, and not be happy and just not
Right.
be able to access a feeling of happiness. And yes, you could be poor, living in a mud hut and never have any money and be happy, right?
But
Yes.
also still not be happy.
But also the opposite is true, right? You can have loads of money, have the car, have the house,
And be completely fulfilled.
and be
Yeah.
absolutely, and vice versa, you know. So yes, it's an inside job, which tells us that it is an inside job, but then I do also think our environment makes a massive difference, you know, and we mustn't
Yeah.
discount that, because there are situations and things that are happening that are jacking up our energy and making it hard to find happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Go on, jump in.
See, no, that I mean, I think that's completely valid. And yes, for some people that resonates. But for me, that does not resonate.
Mm,
And I feel like it is because of what I've come to like understand with the physical bodies and
yes.
the the environment being like the lowest density thing that can affect you. So I ultimately wanted to preserve that. So I built these things, like for example, just I know that stillness, like that's my shit, you know? It's like I can find signs, I can drop in wherever. I've multiple times just been in the middle of conversations and I'm so present and I'm there and I'm listening and I'm feeling this person, but I'm sitting back here like I don't resonate with anything that they're saying, but I'm here and I'm enjoying it. And like finding that happiness to transmute that. But also like placing myself in environments like, you know, even growing up in New York, you know, like I was in the polar opposite, you know, of just complete busyness and, you know, always doing the most and like wilding out and being in parties and da 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 and all this like movement.
Mm,
And ultimately in my heart, I wanted stillness. So when I found that, I find myself in the middle of cities now with a complete and utter smile on my face because I have that maintained state of like stillness and that ultimately brings me that harmony. So I feel like we can I don't want to this is a very strong word, but conquer our environment in that way. And I say conquer it in the way that you said, the way that we navigate, you know. And ultimately this is something that we want to preserve as we go into these spaces, because whether we're empaths, whether, you know, we want to be alpha people, whatever the case is like if you have not conquered your environment by tethering into your whatever your happiness is, whatever your center is, whatever that is, then you're ultimately going to be a slave to it. And you're going to always have a reason to create that outside and continuously be in that state of creation outwardly because of the reason that you haven't found that within, you know?
Yeah. And I think I think this is one of those questions that really highlight that both are true. Like I do think, like you say, like when you conquer your environment, an environment that supports, I don't want to say necessarily, maybe you could say your happiness, or you could say your energy. You know, when you're in an environment that supports you energetically, then you have more capacity to cultivate the practices that draw you closer to happiness. And then the opposite is also true. But ultimately, the cultivation of happiness is a practice, that it's an internal practice.
Right.
But, you know, it's like one of my yoga teachers, he used to say, like, yeah, you can get enlightened on the motorway, but, you know, you're making it harder for yourself. You can sit on the motorway and meditate, vroom, 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 you know what I mean? And it's like, all right, yeah, you could do it, but you're kind of working against your energy there. Or you can go and sit in a sanctuary where it's quiet, where it's, you know, you're surrounded by nature, the sounds of the birds and the bees, and you know what I mean? And then this is what helps you connect more to that tranquility and that energy, and then start to connect to that more in yourself, to a point where you can then go into the chaos again. And because you've cultivated such a strong practice around it, you can go into that and be, like you say, like, be present, be still, be in your place of happiness even amongst the chaos. But if all you do is the chaos, then it's really, really difficult, I think, to cultivate those
That's
practices.
interesting though, because for me, that's exactly what I did, you know? And I think the way that I went about that to cultivate that practice was through this step of leverage, you know? And it was saying, okay, if you're already born into this, right? You're just in chaos, right? And I'm thinking about also people that are living this, like this is your actuality, you know, like we speak about these things, and you know, maybe you've been listening to this podcast and maybe if you're this far in and you haven't hit that subscribe button, you better hit it now. But anyway, making that or having that maybe even resource or opportunity to go to a sanctuary and to go find that stillness and to go find that silence and that peace and all these different things. Maybe you don't have that. Then is it like, oh, well, then it's just going to be difficult? Okay, well, then if I have to accept that it's difficult, then no, then I'm not going to do it that because I can't do it. And for me, I was like, okay, how do I leverage what's already in place? I'm already used to this chaos. I'm already used to this movement. Can I leverage that and do my meditation practice in the middle of the park with all these children around? And it's always so interesting that when I notice, or even when I'm in a meditative state now, right? If I just want to sit down, I want to have some peace. I notice how everybody around me changes. They're like, "Oh, let's just be quiet, just give them some peace," and you try to give me something that I already have myself. And that's the funny thing is, like, I always come out of it and I'm like, no, you're okay. Like, continue doing what you're doing, because I also don't want to enact a state of disharmony outside of me just for my harmony, you know? So yeah, meditating on the motorway, meditating on maybe that is, but you can also look at that as and this is where another higher faculty of, like, imagination, how do you imagine? And I've taken that position of, like, we talked about exercising like a muscle, going to that extreme in those spaces so that when I come out, then I know that I'm completely good. So I don't have to rely on that environment. But that was also just that same process of saying, okay, this wisdom is always there. I just need to figure out what am I creating in the illusion that's the distance that I don't have access to it. So when I'm on the motorway or I'm in front of my kids and everybody's screaming in the car, does that mean that I don't have my happiness or that I'm further away from it? It's like, no. How do I access that and bend space and time to access that spaciousness? because once I access that spaciousness, it goes into, like you said, that presence, and I create that presence, that's
Yeah.
like, in these, now I'm not going to call them gurus, but these people that have reached those different states, and they have such a peaceful state about them. And like, when you walk into a grandma's house, it's like, oh, like I just feel so good. Like I just want to chill, and you're going to get a good meal, you're going to be fulfilled, all these things are going to come because she's created that presence. And it's not that she's going to meditate and going to do all these things. It just comes off because she's created that spaciousness to hold, and for me, when you were explaining that about, that infinite container of compassion, I saw, like, like a grandmother or like a mother nature, just like sitting in the middle of that, just holding everybody, kind of like the world.
I
um
and I
but
can
I
I just because I think it's really, really important to say, because I really do take a slightly different like stance on this, right? I don't feel, for me, that it would ever have been possible for me to find that spaciousness in the extreme of chaos.
right, but we're just kind of comparing that two
Yeah,
truths can exist.
yeah, absolutely. And maybe
Yeah.
it's different. And I think like, and maybe it's interesting that you use the example of a grandmother or a mother, like holding, this kind of nurturing space. And I guess as a woman, like definitely feel like there are often times when in like, in social situations, be that with friendships or just associates or work, particularly with my work, because there's a lot of holding for others, and that's a really beautiful thing, and I'm like feel very, very honored to be able to do that. But also it does mean that there has to be times when I am held also, and for me that is within spaces where there is silence, there is stillness, there is aloneness, there is unmediated, you know um relationship with nature. And when I was in London, it's interesting you talk about New York's very similar. Like London is exactly the same. It's a very busy, chaotic, like there's constantly stuff to do, there's always stuff happening. And even in that, and as somebody who didn't even have that many resources, so I just say it's possible to find those spaces, to find those places and carve them out. And like you said, either that's the public park, like public park was a massive resource for me in London. My home, and even that could have been a room in a home. What used to be for a while, it was just one room. Then I was lucky enough to get my own place, and that became my sanctuary. That becomes my place where, when I shut that door, when I come into my space, that is the sanctuary that I am creating. And so I just think it is possible. And I know, all right, even if you like got a really busy job or you've got responsibilities, kids and things like that. I mean, I know someone who's like a mum, and she just goes in the car. I mean, I know this is a parent thing. I don't know, like the car is like the place. You just go into the car, you're like, right, and I'm going to go for a drive, or I'm going to sit outside, and you come back and you sit in the car for a bit. Like you find those places where you can just shut the outside world out for a moment to connect that. And I do think that like is really, really important wherever you can find it, even if it's just 5 minutes. I think it is really, really important.
Mhm.
Especially if you're a parent and you're holding, or you like a job that has a lot of responsibility. Yeah, you really have to carve out those moments for yourself, and I think you're unique in that sense, that you have that capacity. So I've seen you do it and I'm like, wow, I don't know how you do. Like literally there's just chaos happening around you and you are like, boom, there's absolutely nothing that is going to stop me from doing what I'm doing. Like it is like, that is pretty exceptional. And I feel like maybe not all of, like maybe there's some of our audience that will be that have that capacity, and I think you hold that and show that it's possible. But I feel like, yeah, like I definitely need
Yeah.
I need
No,
aid
I
in
mean, I
my
100%,
environment. Yeah,
yeah, 100% agree with you. I feel like we were just saying the same thing. And really, it's all about just looking at your resources differently
yeah,
and learning how to cultivate that, whether it be on the extreme or whether it be like stepping away, and it's not to say neither one, but it's just to understand that if you ever feel like there is distance between you and happiness, that's the illusion. If you've never believed that up until now, that can be your belief. That's the illusion. is that whenever there's chaos or whenever there's pure silence, you always have that access to that happiness. If once you build that relationship with that higher wisdom and understand what it means to you, like to truly fulfill you, and to know that even if you feel like it's 10 steps in front of you, we have to figure out what that first step is. And that kind of like final like brings us into that last question of like, what is that next best step for you, you know? And I think a lot for me, I would say my first step when it's, and we're going to take out all the, you know, practicalities, like if I'm trying to go towards a goal or to try to achieve something, whatever the case is, it's when I'm stepping back to that harmony, when I find myself like separated from it, because I've found that creating that spaciousness gives you more ability. And I love ability. That is like a willpower thing for me. The more I'm able to do, the more I allow myself to like, I can trust in that judgment and in that wisdom that it's going to bring me all the way out to those edges. And then I'm going to expand a little bit more. And then I come back into that center. So those look like steps. You know, if I know that for me to go into a space, it's going to take 10 steps, you know, and it's 10 steps away from me, and I see that and I tap into that higher faculty of like imagination. If I imagine this thing so big, right? And that first step is always, 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 always for me, discernment. That's my first step, always. And if I am sure and I'm certain in that discernment, I have to, well, excuse me, let me rewind that. I need to be certain first. Once I rest into that certainty, then I take that first step into my discernment, because that for me has always been the first layer. And then I start to work towards those things. So there's that tool, you know, and I think we all have to find that for ourselves, because that wisdom is giving it to you. And like you said, you know, there's this unique way of doing it. You know, you have your unique way of doing it, and you know, I have mine, and I think that's the portion of like learning our life and learning to go through it. And as we're embodying it, is like, how do we turn that pain or that sorrow or that happiness or that joy or whatever into our passion, you know, and inside of us to, yes, create something on the outside, but not be a slave to it, you know? And I think that's the part, because when we are a slave to those passions and those creations outside, then that becomes the thing that confines us, and it confines the soul. And really all the soul wants is freedom. It wants liberation. We all want that, you know? And I think that's the thing that holds us back from figuring out what that first step is, and stepping in whether it be certainty or whether it be security or safety or trust or whatever it may be. And I think it's up to us to find that and to build that relationship with that higher wisdom through some of these tools that, you know, that we shared, and some of these practices, that we can come to understand what that thing is, so that we have trust and safety and security in that center to expand ourselves more and move away from it by choice, but to trust that we are going to come back into that, you know? So yeah, that first step for me always looks like discernment. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that makes so much sense, because how are you going to step towards something before you've discerned what it is you should be stepping towards, right? And you've got to really.
Oh shit, people do it all the time.
Yeah, I guess.
They just like, oh, I'm gonna go this way. Oh damn, I'm here already. I'll find my way back.
Oh, I feel attacked. I'm only joking. I have done, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we were talking about the last episode, is that, you know, you're kind of coming in and out of it, this kind of like, and it was reminding me, because, you know, we were talking about how that looks like DNA strands, and I was like, oh yeah, it also looks like Ida and Pingala, like along the Sushumna channel, right? It's that same kind of energy, and yeah, and it's this dance between these opposites as well. But anyway, that was just the visual that came into my mind. But But yeah, and I think this is such a beautiful question, because I feel like there's so much practicality in this question here for our audience. I guess when I was thinking of this question, I was thinking like personally right now in my life, like what is the next best step for me to do? Like what is the thing I need to be doing next in my life? And I guess this is maybe I don't have an instant sense of like, oh, it's got to be this. I don't have this real strong thing at the moment that's pulling me, and usually I do. So when I know if I've got the pull, then I know that's the direction I'm going in. That will be that's the next best thing, and it'll be movement towards that. And at the moment I feel like what I'm doing is kind of like actually just creating the spaciousness to let that come into my field, to help me then know what my next best step is. And I guess I say that to say, and I spoke to someone yesterday, actually I went to an event yesterday and I spoke to someone, and she was at a like kind of crossroads in her life and sort of thinking like, what do I do next? Like, where do I go? Like my job's ended. I'm not going back to that job, but I'm also not really going back to that life. I don't know what the new life looks like. And where do I go for? And she was just in the middle of that kind of like, I'm in the middle of change and I don't really know what it is I want to do. I don't know what it looks like. And so I think there is something when we were in that place, like what is the next best thing to do in that sense, when, you know, before you even know what it is. And go on, jump in. Like I feel like you like, I know what it is. Like
because that is the illusion there, that we think that because the only thing that's constant is change. So you're already always in the change.
Yes.
And I think that for me has, and maybe this is just me, it's the certainty. I'm certain that this, I always have access to it. So it's always there. It's just, what do I want to see?
Yes.
And instead of if I want to see something, then I create it. If I want to see it, then I believe it, you know? So when I hear about people that are in that space and they're like, oh, like what's my next? And you're consistently looking and looking, you have all these things, that's the overwhelming of the senses, you know? And it's like, let me push all of that here and almost like smear it out, you know? And then you can see like, oh, it's always there.
Yes.
Always. You have infinite possibilities that are there consistently.
Absolutely.
But to discern what that next best step is, how do you do that, you know? And some people do it through intuition, and that's why I feel like these higher faculties are those things to clear up that type of confusion.
Yes.
And I express this to my clients consistently, you know, we focus on these things like hugely, because the higher faculties are your keys and your compasses and your tools to get through life. So that you don't find yourself in those spaces, you know.
I mean this is maybe this is important for anyone listening. I mean, this was a woman who'd worked in a particular job for a particular, you know, for a long time, that there'd been a whole identity, and then she'd gone on a sabbatical. She was traveling around the world and was suddenly in the middle of a spiritual kind of like purpose awakening moment in her life, where it was like, oh, I've been living my life like this. And then suddenly you come to Costa Rica and everyone's like, yeah, manifestation, healing, like all about that life. And then suddenly she's like interfacing with all these people that are like, yeah, this is like normal. We're all doing this. And then I think this was a little bit overwhelmed, but I think there was something in it. Like, it was a really beautiful conversation and she was on a very beautiful journey. And I think I didn't give her any advice in that moment, but I guess what I would say, if there's anybody listening that resonates with that, I think what I said to her was that, like, it will come, like that, like you said, like it's within your field all the time. It's not that you don't need to go out there and like grab it and grasp for it. It's already here. So it will come to you, and you'll feel it, because it is that thing that ignites you. It's that thing. Sometimes I think of it as like the Page of Swords in the tarot. The Page of Swords for me is like, maybe, like that's what it's like. It's just an initial. It's not fully formed. It's not the page. Did I say Page of Swords? I meant Page of Wands. But it's not like a fully formed like thing. It's not like I haven't grasped it yet. It's a kind of just like a little maybe, and it just awakens my senses. It awakens, enlivens, and inspires me, creates an imagination in me. It's like, maybe that could be. That is it. It just starts with that. Like, that is where And I feel like that won't lead you astray. I feel like if you follow those trails in your life of those things that make you go, ooh, that could be amazing. Those little things, and then you create life, and it starts there. And just trust that. And at any given moment, that'll always be present. There'll always be that thing that from bring, do you want to do this? Do you want to go here? Hey, I've got this project coming up, or or you meet someone, you go somewhere, and then this magic is constantly happening where you're just like, bing, ooh, in my field now. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
Let's follow it like the white rabbit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a lovely way to put it as well. And to see that like positivity, and yeah, I think it's that, just like you said, that kind of like wonder and that magic, and I think that's the part, it's like to see that there's this balance. And we always kind of finish up with this dilemma, and there's this advice, but really what we were ultimately talking about here was this wisdom, yes, but also the dilemma is like, how do we decide, like, what do we do, what's best, which way do we go, and how do we make those decisions? And I think it's this, like, we were explaining exactly what reason is and how there is this intuitive side, and you can, whether you anchor that reason into your heart, or you anchor that reason into your mind, or you anchor that reason into your body, wherever you anchor that into, then that becomes your tether, of where you want to go with this reason, and to ultimately give it reason, because I think that's kind of like what Hume's was talking about with this passion, is like, for me, like, I take this because I believe both of the quotes, but there is that passion, and to really create anything that's in life, or to embrace it and allow it to come into you, with through this wisdom that's happening simultaneously, consistently. It's like we want to give it some reason, and we want to give it some support. So yeah, just truly deciding, and however which way you decide, that is ultimately the advice, because you have the freedom of will, and you have the practice of discernment, and it's your tool. And we expressed our ways of doing it, and these are just perspectives and facets and sides that you can, but ultimately it's up to you to understand this difference of how you want to shape and mold the relationship to this higher wisdom, because ultimately, if you're driven by passion, or you're passionate about drive, either which way you look at it, there is a process, and there's also a relationship to this thing, and I think when we understand that, the difficulty is when we see that it's separate from us. The difficulty comes within that illusion, and ultimately that is not the wisdom. We're not having access to that, and we're denying ourselves something that is our birthright, and is ultimately something that we are a part of, and we're a part of it collectively, we're a part of it universally. And this is why we have those faculties, because those are our access points. So whether you're in a car, whether you're in a job, whether you're just going through this spiritual time in your life, and you're at that point, you have all of these positive abilities, and it's up to us to take these tools and form them into possibilities.
Beautiful. And I think it's so important to keep reminding ourselves of that, because I think it can be easy to get lost in the soup and
Absolutely.
forget that, and so beautifully said.
Yeah.
And
so yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully you guys took some gems from this, and if you are interested in that course, obviously drop a comment, and I can send you over a link.
We will leave a link in the description as well, if we can.
Well, there's not a link that goes straight to it, but you can ask for
it. Okay.
And after you hit that subscribe button, I'm gonna check if you did. But yeah, hopefully you got some really good gems out of this, and and just really kind of ask yourself some of these questions to ultimately start to build spaciousness and start to build these infinite possibilities, utilizing and tapping into these higher faculties. And stay tuned for more. Yeah, and with that, Chaka, everybody listening, thank you guys for just receiving and being here with me and allowing this share. And obviously, Shaka, thank you for always showing up and being that beautiful mirror that you are. I just want to personally, encapsulate this in my individualized expression to you and to the listeners here. But yeah, ultimately for the motherfucking quadrant, this is why we're here, to help bring some guidance and some balance to all of these different polarities, and just share with you in the collective and connect to that universal. So until next time, we're going to see y'all next week on this beautiful motherfucking podcast.
Ciao for now.
If you like this episode, please support the podcast and the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, or donating. You will also find all of the show notes and questions in the description, along with important links and contact details. We look forward to seeing you next time here with us on this MF Quadrant.